All right, so let's talk about the mid-chapter review for Chapter 1. Got some bullet points here I'm going to go through. Remember, all the videos are available for you to go back to on any individual section that you want to go back to and review. But some key things to look out for in the different sections for Chapter 1. In 1.1 and 1.2, we talked about solving linear equations and inequalities. And so things that we needed to be able to do, you need to be able to translate between their forms in algebraic and verbal for expressions, equations, and inequalities. We had 8 properties as we look at here: reflexive, symmetric, transitive, substitution, addition, subtraction, the property of equality, and the multiplication and division property of equality. Remember, reflexive means that a number is equal to itself. Symmetric means that I can flip the two sides. Transitive, remember that's your A is equal to B and B is equal to C, so A is equal to C, right? My favorite one. Substitution means that if I have X is equal to Y and 3 is equal to Y, then I can say that X is equal to 3, right? Because I can substitute one in for the other. Or I can substitute in that 3 is, that X is equal to Y, right? Or we said that in the first. And remember, addition, subtraction, properties of equality, that's just where we're able to add something to both sides or subtract something to both sides. Same with multiplication and division. Remember to solve equations and inequalities. Remember to use your inverse operation. So if it's addition, to undo with subtraction. If it's division, to undo with multiplication, so on. And that's when we move across the equal sign or the inequality symbol. One thing we didn't talk a lot about in 1.1 and 1.2 was compound inequalities. And the key things on and or problems. So remember, an and problem a lot of times is going to look like a two-part inequality. So like 3 is less than or equal to 2x plus 1 is less than 11, right? I remember when you're solving that, you would take each piece, right? We're trying to get the middle to where x is by itself. So 2 less than or equal to 2x less than 10. And then we can divide by 2 to get the x by itself. So 1 less than or equal to x less than 5. And so when we do that, remember, we go to our graph and we're going to put our numbers on there. We got 2 critical values here. And so we want to have a number to the left, a number to the middle, and a number to the right. And so when we draw this inequality on the number line, we're going to have a dot at 1 because it's equal to, but we'll have a circle at 5 because it's not equal to. And this literally says that 1 has to be less than whatever my x value is. So x could, for example, be 2 or 3 or 4 or 10. But the problem is it's on the top side to be less than 5. So this x is in between these two values. So most of the time, there are some exceptions, most of the time that shading for an and problem will be between the two values. Again, there are exceptions if our inequalities get flipped or something, but for what we're looking at right now, not so. Remember, with OR problems, you're going to have 2 separate inequalities that you're solving. And when you solve those 2 separate inequalities, again, most of the time, you're going to get 2 separate pieces that will graph out in opposite directions, again, on the number line going outward, right? So again, our shadings would be here and here on the number line. So again, it could be circles, could be dots, could be either one, but they're going to go out in either direction. Remember, go back to the 1.1, 1.2 video if there's anything from this section that you're still a little confused on. 1.3, short section, right? We talked about rate of change in slope. Again, slope formula, m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Or we talked about the rate of change being the change in y over the change in x. And remember, like the airplane problem we looked at in the work for 1.3 and how we had to use rate of change for those. Be able to identify how to get the rate of change out of a word problem. Be able to identify 2 points on the graph to get the slope from. Okay. Again, 1.3, really quick section there. 1.4, writing linear equations. And so this is what we did yesterday. Remember slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. Remember the m is the slope. And the b is the y-intercept, point slope form, y minus y sub 1 is equal to m times x minus x sub 1. And remember what plugs in where for that. x1 and y1 being your point, and m still being the slope. And remember, we're going to use those forms to be able to do parallel and perpendicular lines. Remember that parallel lines have the same slope, right? So if I get the slope of my first line, it's going to be the same for the second line. And if I'm perpendicular, remember our two words, the word of the day from the other day, opposite reciprocal, right? And so if you've got opposite reciprocal, remember our first slope, if it happens to be, let's say, negative 5/3, the slope perpendicular would be what? That's right, 3/5, positive 3/5, because remember the opposite changes our sign and the reciprocal flips our fraction. Okay. Lastly, 1.5, I know you probably just watched this video like maybe 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, or maybe you're watching it after you got home and want to watch it tonight in review for tomorrow's quiz. But graphing linear inequalities, remember to graph the line based on what form it's in, slope, intercept, standard, or point slope. I know we didn't talk about point slope in the lesson specifically, but remember we talked about 1.4 being able to use point slope and how we could get the point in, so we should be able to take the point out and graph with it. Remember what type of line we need to deal with. So remember if it's less than or greater than, it's going to be that dashed line. If it's less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, it's going to be that solid line. And remember, where's the shading? Where do I plug in 0, 0 and figure out if the shading's going to work there or not work there, or try a different point, right? And the last thing, the big thing to remember from 1.5, I would say, is trying to identify what type of inequality is needed in a word problem. Be able to identify, am I going to be greater than, or am I going to be less than, or greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So words like the maximum, right? And again, these are all things that you should have talked about middle school, right? If I have a maximum, can I be equal to the value that I want to be equal to? Of course. And so I would have whatever I have has to be less than or equal to my value that I'm told is the max value. Same thing goes with minimum. It would just be the other way. Okay. So any questions you have, of course, feel free to ask. If you're watching this at home tonight and you need to email, and I'll get back to you when I can. I hope you all have a great one. See you then.